I thought I was building a future for my family, sacrificing time and energy to give them everything, only to discover I was the fool in my own story. The truth I uncovered shattered my world in ways I never saw coming, and once you hear it, you won't believe what I did next. I've been married for 20 years, weathering the ups and downs that come with a long and complex relationship. But recently, I uncovered a devastating secret, one that had been buried for an entire decade. What I found out that day shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. My name is Henry, and I'm a 42-year-old businessman who worked his way up from nothing. Success didn't come easy, it was built on years of sacrifice, relentless hard work, and an unshakable determination to never return to the struggles of my past. Growing up in a lower-middle-class household, I learned early on that financial security wasn't just a luxury, it was a necessity. I watched my parents stretch every dollar, and I swore that one day, I'd build a life where money was never a concern. That drive became my obsession, my purpose. Samantha, my wife, was there through it all. We were high school sweethearts, bound by love, shared dreams, and an understanding of each other's hardships. She had witnessed my family's financial struggles firsthand, and rather than letting them intimidate her, she encouraged me to dream bigger. We built our life together, believing that nothing could shake the foundation of our love. We've been married for over 2 decades now and have a 17-year-old daughter, Emily, who means the world to me. In the early years, our marriage was everything I had ever hoped for. We just clicked, understood each other in a way that felt rare and unbreakable. People admired our relationship, saying we were the kind of couple that would last forever. And for the longest time, I believed them. But now I feel like I've lost something I never imagined I'd have to fight for: hope. Looking back, I suppose it all started when my business took off. What began as a simple vision turned into one of the most successful companies in the country within just a year. I was living the dream I had worked so hard for, but it came at a cost. The long hours, the constant pressure, the need to stay ahead, I became consumed by it. I'd leave home before sunrise and return late at night, exhausted and drained, barely able to hold a meaningful conversation. But that doesn't mean I stopped trying. No matter how busy I was, I made an effort to be present. Even if it was just a few stolen moments in the evening, I would sit with Samantha, trying to hold on to the connection we once had. I never forgot an anniversary, a birthday, or any milestone that mattered to us. I wanted her to know that despite my packed schedule, she was still my priority. Yet, despite everything I did, I could feel her slipping away. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't doing enough. Maybe my absence had created a distance between us that I couldn't see. But then again, how much more could I give? I wasn't just working for myself. I was working for our family, for our future. And still, something had changed. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. What I didn't know then was that this change, the distance I felt but couldn't explain, wasn't just in my head. It was real. And soon, I'd find out just how much had been hidden from me. I was doing everything I could. I tried to talk to Samantha to understand what was wrong so I could fix it. But every time I asked, she'd either brush it off or give me vague answers that led nowhere. No matter how hard I tried to break through the distance, she kept building walls between us. Then, 3 years into our marriage, our daughter, Haley, was born. She was the greatest gift I had ever received. The moment I held her in my arms, I knew my life had changed forever. That day was the happiest of my life, and from that moment on, I was determined to be the best father I could possibly be. Being a good father, to me, meant making sure Haley never experienced the struggles I had growing up. I wanted her to have everything she needed, everything she wanted, without ever feeling the weight of financial uncertainty. So, I pushed even harder at work, taking on extra responsibilities and longer hours to secure a future for her. But with that success came a price. More time away from home. More late nights at the office. More evenings where I'd walk into the house only to find both Samantha and Haley already asleep. For reasons I couldn't understand, Samantha and I only drifted further apart after Haley was born. I had thought having a child together would bring us closer, give us a new bond to share. But instead, it seemed to drive a wedge between us. Every attempt at a real conversation turned into an argument. The warmth that once filled our home had been replaced with tension, and no matter how much I tried to fix it, the divide kept growing. I could see the impact it had on Haley even when she was just a baby. A home should be a place of love and security, but instead, ours was filled with unspoken frustrations and quiet resentment. It wasn't long before Samantha and I stopped trying to talk at all. We spoke only when necessary, about groceries, schedules, household tasks. Beyond that, there was nothing. The silence between us became deafening. We had gone from being partners to being nothing more than roommates, living separate lives under the same roof. For years, I told myself we were doing a good enough job of hiding our issues from Haley. I thought she was too young to understand. But the truth is, children sense more than we give them credit for. And as much as I hate to admit it, Samantha played a role in making things worse. By the time Haley turned 10, Samantha had started talking to her about our relationship problems. She would confide in her like she was a friend rather than a child, venting about me in ways no child should ever have to hear. It made no sense. Why burden her with something that wasn't her responsibility? Worse yet, it slowly began to affect the way Haley saw me. I could feel a shift in the way she responded to me, the way she hesitated before speaking, the way she pulled away just a little more each time. I know I've been busy. I know I haven't always been as present as I should be. But everything I do, every late night, every long hour, I do for them. I work myself to exhaustion to give them a life of comfort and security. And yet, instead of appreciation, all I seem to get in return is resentment. And I don't understand why. I never imagined my life would feel this empty. There was a time when I knew Samantha had thought about divorce. Our marriage had been strained for years, and the cracks were becoming harder to ignore. When I found out, I made a real effort to talk to her, to show her that I was willing to fight for our relationship. I told her I'd work harder, that I wanted to fix what was broken. But after a while, it started to feel one-sided. Every argument we had seemed to circle back to the same accusation, that I wasn't doing enough, that I wasn't trying hard enough to save our marriage. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized, neither was she. I planned special days for us. I never missed an important occasion. I bought her thoughtful gifts, not because I had to, but because I wanted her to feel cherished. And yet, she never seemed to remember any of it. The only thing she could recall was that I worked late, that I didn't spend enough time with her, that I wasn't present. I made an effort to be there for Haley too. I attended her games, showed up for school events, tried to be involved in her life as much as I could. But no matter what I did, it felt like I was invisible. Like my efforts went unnoticed. Still, none of that compared to the overwhelming emotions I felt on one particular night, the night everything seemed to spiral even further. It was a random Thursday evening, and for once, I managed to leave work earlier than usual. It was a rare chance to spend quality time with my family, and I wanted to make the most of it. I pictured a cozy movie night, the three of us on the couch, sharing popcorn, enjoying each other's company. But when I got home, the house felt empty. Haley wasn't there. When I asked Samantha about it, she casually mentioned that she had gone to a party and wouldn't be back until midnight. That was news to me. We had a curfew in place, but apparently that no longer mattered. Still, I figured I could at least enjoy the evening with Samantha. I suggested we watch a movie together, just the two of us. But she barely acknowledged the idea before saying she was exhausted and heading straight to bed. I couldn't help but wonder what had kept her so busy all day. But I didn't push. Instead, I tried to make the best of the quiet night. I grabbed a cup of coffee, settled on the couch, and turned on the TV. I even opened my laptop, thinking I'd get some work done while I waited for Haley to come home. Even though she had a curfew, I still worried about her. I wanted to be awake when she walked through the door, to see for myself that she was safe. But just an hour later, my phone rang. It was the police station. Haley had been arrested for underage drinking. In that moment, my world seemed to crash around me. I had always stressed the dangers of drinking at her age. I had trusted her to be responsible, to make good choices. And now that trust had been shattered. Fear, disappointment, and frustration all hit me at once as I grabbed my jacket and rushed out the door. The entire drive to the station, my mind raced with questions. How did this happen? What had led her to make this choice? And most importantly, was this just the beginning of something worse? When I finally walked into the station, scanning the room for her, my heart sank. There she was, sitting there like she had all the time in the world, completely unbothered. Not a hint of regret. Not even a trace of embarrassment. She met my gaze and rolled her eyes. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I wanted to yell, to shake some sense into her, to make her understand the gravity of what she had done. But instead, I spoke as calmly as I could, laying out the consequences of her actions. How reckless this was. How this could impact her future. How she was on a dangerous path if she kept making choices like this. I hoped, desperately, that something I said would break through to her. That she would show some remorse. Some acknowledgement that she had made a mistake. But she didn't. She just sat there unfazed. And in that moment, I realized something that terrified me more than anything else. I was losing my daughter. I arranged for Haley's release as quickly as possible, and we made our way back to the car in complete silence. I was furious, so much so that I couldn't even bring myself to speak. But what baffled me even more was her silence. She didn't apologize. She didn't thank me for getting her out of this mess. Nothing. If Samantha had been the one to answer that call, Haley would have had to endure a long, merciless scolding. But instead, she had me, the parent who was still trying to keep his emotions in check, still trying to keep the door open for a real conversation. I wasn't going to let my anger push her further away, but at the same time, I couldn't just ignore what had happened. As soon as we settled into the car and I started driving, the weight of it all became too much to suppress. I had to say something. I had always made it clear, I disapproved of underage drinking. And Haley knew that. Yet here we were. Not only had she gotten herself arrested, but she didn't even seem to grasp the seriousness of the situation. So I told her exactly how I felt. At first I kept my voice steady, controlled. But the more I spoke, the more the conversation spiraled into a heated argument. What started as a stern lecture quickly turned into a full-blown battle of words. She wasn't sorry. She didn't think she had done anything wrong. I'm 17, she shot back. I can make my own decisions. She argued that all of her friends drank, and their parents didn't freak out like I was. To her, I was overreacting. Being dramatic. Her reasoning was ridiculous to me. Just because her friends did something that made it okay? What if they were involved in something even riskier, something truly dangerous? Why was she so willing to blindly follow their lead, trusting them to make good choices for her? My frustration only fueled hers. The conversation escalated. We were both angry, both speaking over each other until at some point the actual argument didn't even matter anymore. And then, out of nowhere, she said something that changed everything. A single sentence. A bombshell that would alter the course of my life forever. Through clenched teeth, with fire in her eyes, she blurted it out. Samantha's been cheating on you for years. For a moment, I couldn't process what I had just heard. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. My entire body went cold. What did you just say? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Haley's expression shifted. She realized what she had just let slip. And suddenly she clamped up. Nothing, she muttered. Forget it. But there was no forgetting it. Haley, I said, my voice firm. Tell me the truth. She shook her head. Refused to say another word. No matter how many times I asked, she wouldn't budge. But I already knew. Somehow, deep down, I already knew. And at that moment, my entire world began to crumble. I pressed Haley for answers, my patience wearing thin with every second of her silence. She refused to speak, her lips pressed together in defiance. But I couldn't let it go, I needed to know the truth. My frustration boiled over, and before I knew it, I was raising my voice, practically shouting in the car. I hated resorting to that, but I had no other choice. I had to force the truth out of her. And then she finally cracked. What she told me shattered whatever remained of my already crumbling world. For years, Samantha had been unfaithful. This wasn't just a one-time mistake, not a fleeting lapse in judgment. No. She had made a habit of it, having brief affairs that lasted a few months before she got bored and moved on to the next man. And it hadn't stopped. It was still happening. As I listened to Haley speak, my grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles turned white. I sat there in silence, absorbing every word while a storm of rage brewed inside me. Haley had known. She had known for years. And that realization cut me almost as deeply as the betrayal itself. By the time she finished, my only thought was confronting Samantha. I needed to hear her say it, to see if she had even a shred of remorse. But as much as I wanted to march into that house and demand answers, I couldn't. Not yet. Haley was already distressed, and no matter how furious I was with Samantha, my daughter didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this any more than she already had been. Still, the longer I sat with this information, the harder it became to hold back my emotions. Every time I looked at Samantha, all I saw was a woman who had betrayed me over and over again. A woman who had been lying to my face for years. And the worst part? She acted as if nothing had changed. She moved through the house like everything was fine, like she wasn't the reason our marriage had become nothing more than an illusion. But why would she feel any guilt? She wasn't the one suffering. She hadn't spent years being deceived. She hadn't been the fool who thought he was building a future with someone who actually cared. The resentment festered inside me, growing stronger every time she asked me for a favor or expected me to play the role of a doting husband. The mere sound of her voice grated on my nerves. And then there was Haley. If it weren't for her, I would have thrown Samantha out of the house the moment I learned the truth. But I couldn't. The thought of losing my daughter, of having her resent me even more than she already did, was unbearable. Even if she didn't hold me in high regard, even if she had been conditioned to see me as the absent, uninvolved father, she was still my little girl. I loved her just as much as I did the day she was born. Nothing would ever change that. But the painful truth was that Samantha had been poisoning her against me for years, manipulating her perception of me for as long as she was old enough to understand. I had spent so much time and effort trying to provide for them, making sure they had everything they could ever want or need. And for what? So I could be cast as the villain in my own home? One evening, in a moment of raw frustration, I finally asked Haley something I had been thinking about for a long time. If I worked less, if I was home more, but we couldn't afford everything you wanted, would that be better? She didn't answer. She just sat there silent. And somehow that silence hurt more than anything she could have said. I told Haley that I intended to confront her mother about everything, but she immediately protested. She was adamant, practically begging me not to do it. She didn't want our family to fall apart. She wanted me to stay quiet, to just keep going as if nothing had happened. I tried to explain to her that it wasn't that simple, that I couldn't just pretend, that it was unrealistic, impossible, to expect me to bury my emotions and continue life as if everything was normal. Maybe someone else could do that. Maybe some other man could ignore the betrayal, suppress the anger, and carry on like nothing had changed. But I wasn't that man. I had never been good at hiding my emotions, not when Samantha and I were happy, and certainly not now when our entire relationship was on the verge of collapse. The weight of it all started affecting every part of my life. At work, my frustration followed me like a shadow. I found myself snapping at employees over the smallest things, getting irritated over minor mistakes, and letting my short temper seep into conversations that had nothing to do with my personal life. Even my assistant, who had always been patient and understanding, ended up caught in the crossfire. At home, things were even worse. Every interaction with Samantha became an argument. It didn't matter what she said or did, I found myself lashing out, unable to hold back the resentment that had been festering inside me. The tension became unbearable, and before long we started sleeping in separate rooms. Haley had asked me not to tell her mother that I knew about the affairs, and I had tried to respect her wishes. But the fights, the distance, the sheer weight of it all, it only made things worse. Then one Sunday I snapped. I don't even remember what triggered it. Maybe it was the way Samantha looked at me like I was the problem. Maybe it was the indifference in her voice when she spoke to me. Or maybe it was just the sheer exhaustion of pretending that I could live like this. But in front of both Haley and Samantha, I let it all out. I demanded the truth. I wanted the names of the men she had been with. I wanted her to acknowledge what she had done, to at least have the decency to admit it. Instead she laughed. A cold, sarcastic laugh that sent rage coursing through my veins. Then she looked me in the eye and said something so absurd, so shameless, that I didn't even know how to react. You lost the right to ask me that when you stopped coming home early to be with us. That was her excuse. Her justification. She had betrayed me, shattered our family, and now she had the audacity to blame me for it? But she wasn't done. Every man she had been with, she claimed, had made her feel more loved than I ever had. I stood there, stunned, unable to find the words to respond. How could she say that? After everything I had done, after all the sacrifices I had made to build a life for us, this was how she saw it? No matter how hard I had worked, no matter how much I had tried to provide for them, it had never been enough. And at that moment I realized something painful. They would never understand. They would never see the long nights, the exhausting days, the endless effort I had put into giving them a life of comfort. To them I had always been absent. And to me they had never truly seen what I was fighting for. I had always made an effort. I never forgot an important date. Birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, I made sure we spent them together no matter how demanding my work was. Even on the days when I came home late, drained from the endless hours at the office, I still tried to be present. I still tried to be there for them. Sure, I rarely saw Haley during the week because of my early mornings and late nights, but that was the sacrifice I had to make. I was working for us, for our future. And yet, none of that mattered in the end. Not to Samantha. Not to Haley. That realization was painful at first. But pain has a way of turning into something else, something sharper. Resentment. I used to believe that no matter what happened, they would always need me. That someday, once they understood everything I had sacrificed, they'd want me back. They'd realize what I had done for them. But when that moment comes, when they finally beg for my return, I won't be there. They can cry themselves to sleep for all I care. Because I'm never coming back. Over the years, I had built my business into something far greater than I had ever imagined. What started as a small company had expanded globally, and now I had branches in numerous countries. I had spent years giving everything to my family, and now? It was time to start giving something to myself. And so, I made the decision. I was leaving. I could work from anywhere in the world and I chose to relocate to Europe. I didn't overthink it. I didn't second-guess myself. I simply packed my bags and prepared to walk away. Just 2 days after making the decision, I started clearing out my side of the bedroom, stuffing clothes into a suitcase, removing every trace of myself from that house. That's when Samantha finally noticed. She walked in, her brow furrowed with concern. "What are you doing?" At first I said nothing. I kept packing, unwilling to waste my breath on pointless explanations. But then I changed my mind. She should know. So I told her. I was leaving. Leaving her. Leaving Haley. Leaving all of it behind. I told her that now she was free to bring over any man she wanted. She didn't have to sneak around anymore because I was done. For good. For a brief moment she looked genuinely shocked. Then, as if on cue, she asked, "How are we supposed to survive?" I almost laughed. She had spent years telling me I was absent, that I wasn't part of this family. Yet the second I walked away, she suddenly remembered how much she had relied on me. That realization hung heavy between us. She had nothing to say after that. No apology. No remorse. No last-minute plea to make things right. Just silence. And in that silence, whatever lingering hope I had, any small part of me that thought she might understand, was crushed. The weight in my chest was unbearable. A mix of anger, grief, and sorrow all tangled together as I stood there, staring at the woman I had once loved. I wasn't just leaving a marriage. I was leaving a life. The thought of starting over in a foreign country was daunting, but I knew it was necessary. For the first time in years, I was making a decision for me. No more sacrifices. No more trying to please people who would never appreciate it. I boarded my flight and exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. But my peace was short-lived. Just as I was settling in, my phone buzzed. Samantha. I sighed heavily before answering. Whatever she had to say, I knew one thing for certain. It wouldn't change a thing. I braced myself for what was coming. The accusations. The demands. The guilt trips. Samantha wasted no time urging me to return, or at the very least, send some money their way so they could maintain the lifestyle they were so accustomed to. She argued that after everything, I owed them that much. But when had I ever approved of the things they took for granted? They had always assumed the money, the gifts, the comfort of our home, it was all just theirs to have, as if it came effortlessly. As if it wasn't the result of years of my blood, sweat, and sacrifice. And now, after throwing me aside, they suddenly wanted my support? I ignored her calls, but then came the messages from Haley. Reading them felt like reopening an old wound. At first, there was pain in her words, a longing from a daughter struggling to navigate the aftermath of her parents' failed marriage. For a brief moment, I thought she was reaching out because she missed me, because she still wanted her father in her life. But soon, her messages took on a different tone. Colder. Sharper. It became painfully clear that her kindness had come with an expectation. She wasn't reaching out because she missed me. She was hoping I'd send money, to restore the life of luxury they had lost because of their own selfishness. I watched, helpless, as my daughter transformed into someone I no longer recognized. The more she messaged, the further I withdrew. Each demand, each entitled request only reinforced one truth: I had made the right decision by leaving. And so, I stopped responding. I buried myself in my work, built a new life far away from the ruins of my past, and tried, really tried, to move on. But moving on isn't always a straight path. Sometimes the heart clings to old memories, to the dreams we once held close. And for me that meant remembering May. I watched as May got ready for the evening, slipping into a new dress she had recently bought and carefully applying her makeup. This was her usual routine whenever she went out, so I didn't think much of it. She told me she was meeting her friends, and I had no reason to doubt her. At least, not until her best friend called. Confused, I answered the phone, only to hear something that made my stomach drop. Her best friend and the rest of the group weren't planning to hang out that night. May had lied. As I tried to process that, her best friend hesitated before asking me something else. "Is my husband with you?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't seen him since the last time we all hung out together. But when I told her that, I could hear the panic in her voice. "That's impossible," she said. "He told me he was going out for drinks with you tonight." That's when it all clicked. May had lied. Her best friend's husband had lied. And I had to find out why. Without wasting another second, we tracked them down. A hotel not far from where we lived. I could barely breathe as I knocked on the door of the room she was staying in. My heart pounded in my chest, part of me hoping I was wrong, hoping there was some other explanation. But then May opened the door. And the second she saw me standing there, with her best friend by my side, her face drained of all color. She was standing in the doorway wearing nothing but a bathrobe. And behind her, sprawled out in bed, was him. Her best friend's husband. For a brief moment, no one moved. The weight of what was happening settled in like a thick, suffocating fog. But then, everything erupted at once. I pulled out my phone, hitting record as I unleashed all the anger, betrayal, and heartbreak that had been bottled up inside me. Her best friend, who had always been so composed, so put together, completely lost it. She lunged at her husband, shouting, shoving, demanding answers. But there were no answers that could fix this. No excuses that could justify the wreckage they had caused. May stood there, humiliated. Exposed. She tried to speak, but I wasn't interested in hearing her lies anymore. I wanted everyone to know the truth. So we made sure they did. We posted the video online, and censored raw and unforgiving. Using Snapchat location data, we tracked where they had been that night and kept sharing the proof until it spread like wildfire. It wasn't long before our entire hometown knew what had happened. For May, this was beyond humiliating. She had grown up in this town. She had spent years cultivating friendships, building a reputation. And now, in a matter of hours, it was all crumbling around her. I should have felt satisfied. But all I felt was emptiness. For days, weeks, I wasn't myself. The heartbreak consumed me, making every moment feel like a dull ache that wouldn't go away. May's betrayal wasn't just about us. She hadn't just destroyed our marriage, she had thrown away a 15-year friendship without a second thought. If she was capable of that, what else had she done behind my back? The thought was too much to bear. So I left. I packed up my life and moved somewhere far away, somewhere I could start over without being haunted by the memories of what she had done. But no matter how far I go, the pain still lingers. I loved my wife. I built a life with her. And she destroyed everything. Right now, I know I'm not ready to let someone else in. Maybe one day I'll be able to open my heart again. But today I'm still picking up the pieces.